Dentistry. And I want to introduce our renowned speaker today. And just reiterate again, there's food and drink back here. Isaac and Carrie have bathroom keys. Anything you need, let us know. 45 minutes of book talk and then some Q&A about Dr. Stephen Felton. Stephen was born in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. He came to the US with his mother in 47. He grew up in Brooklyn, went to Brooklyn College, obtained a Ph.D. in chemistry at Rutgers University. He then did a postdoctoral fellowship in bioorganic mechanisms at University of California at Santa Barbara. He obtained an MD from University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, and then did an ophthalmology residency at Wills Eye Hospital. He started a practice in Princeton, New Jersey. Oh, I used to live there, which became the Princeton Eye Group. He's now retired, is married to Barbara, who's here, welcome, and has several children and grandchildren. He published his mother's Holocaust memoirs, I Shall Lead You Through the Nights. He has spoken of his Holocaust history at schools, synagogues, and clubs. Friends, please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Felton.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Shmuley, for that wonderful introduction. I talk about the Holocaust because I think it's so important that we're cognizant of what happened 80 years ago. And this is a particularly important time to talk about it because, the word genocide is being bandied about all over the place. And genocide, so genocide is the planned methodical extermination of a people, which took place 80 years ago. It's not a country trying to defend itself from extinction, as Israel is doing right now. So my mother and I were the only survivors of a large Polish family. And what I want to do is tell you the story. I'm going to read from the book to some degree. But I want you to try to imagine you're living comfortably with your family, enjoying life in your home with all your possessions and your friends. Then insidiously, there are anti-Semitic events occurring. You read about it in a newspaper. Statements are made by people, elected officials. Then there's a gradual erosion of your liberty directed at you and all other Jews. There's violence against Jews. Then you're told you must live in a prescribed neighborhood, a ghetto. Then there are roundups, and you find yourself and your family herded to a train, in a train station, and put on a train to somewhere with only your meager possessions with you. It's a crowded boxcar train. You wonder, how did it come to this? What did I do? The train, after days, stops, and you're herded into a building by soldiers and dogs, made to strip, and then you for a shower, and then you realize that's the end. This was genocide 80 years ago, 6 million Jews. And this is what is currently being denied by so many people, such as David Duke, David Irving, Alex Jones, Ayatollah Khomeini, and many others. My father, my brother, my mother's 5 siblings, my mother's parents, and many more were killed in this genocide. My mother and I were the only ones left in this large family. To deny my history is an insult. And my only response is to tell my mother's story and hope to spark an understanding of what really happened. But can you really understand what happened? How can human beings systematically, in a machine-like fashion, in huge numbers, murder fellow human beings? What perverse ideology can drive this? So do we truly understand the roots of anti-Semitism? I'll leave these questions for you to ponder. By giving this talk, I'll try to convey to you the horror of living in Poland during the Holocaust. And I give this talk to honor my mother. My mother wrote a 100-page memoir before she died. And that's what this book is. I had it published several years later. Holocaust survivors hardly ever talked about their experience. And this is very common, and you hear about that all the time. My mother, before she died, felt that she had to, and that's why she did it for the family. She survived the Holocaust with the tremendous yearning to have a family. She wanted to create a family, which is what Hitler tried to deny her of, but she wanted to do something to show the world that Jews cannot be eradicated. So what I will do is give you some history of that period of time, and then I will read from the book. So I was born in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. And prior to the war, Warsaw was about 1/3 Jewish, with about 400,000 residents. So Poland was invaded by the German army on September 1st, 1939. And 2 months later, severe restrictions were placed on the Jewish population to the extent that they had to wear Hebrew stars on their shoulders. The ghetto was established in 1940, in October of 1940, when up to 400,000 Jews were herded into the ghetto. And just to give you an idea of what the ghetto was 1.3 square miles, and it had, at some point, it had up to 400,000 people in it. Okay, just think of Paradise Valley, about 15 square miles with 15,000 people. You can see how horrific that crowding was. There was starvation, disease, random searches and killings. And then in July 1942, this is about a month after I was born, the deportation to the death camps began. 75% of the ghetto population, which was 400,000 people, were deported and killed in the extermination camps during the subsequent year. The ghetto uprising took place in May of 1943, and it lasted about a month. So the Jews were able to hold off the Germans and the Nazis for about a month. So that was some history. I just want to tell you something about my mother. My mother grew up in a small town in eastern Poland called Mush. She had 5 siblings, and she had a very happy childhood. She described a wonderful family. They were a religious family. They observed the Shabbat. Now, she wanted to become a nurse, and she convinced her parents to let her go to Warsaw to study nursing. So she became the only Jewish student admitted to the St. Sophie's School of Nursing. In 1938, after she graduated, she met my father, who was a widower and had a son, Stasha, who was about 11 years old at that time, and they were married. So they were married in 1938, and things started happening in 1939. And I'm going to read from my mother's book to let you know, give you an idea of how things were at that time. This is from her book. In August of 1939, the 3 of us, Victor, our son Stasio, and I went to the Baltic seashore to a summer resort of Orlovo. We were troubled there when we heard news from Germany that was very disturbing. By the end of August, people had started to panic. Everyone was trying to get home. The trains were filled with people who could hardly stand, and Stasio, our son, was squeezed between us. Back in Warsaw, Tasia, our housekeeper, was very happy to see us when we arrived home late in the evening, exhausted. We went straight to bed, but could not sleep. The telephone rang from the moment we arrived until very late that night. Everyone was happy to hear our voices. Everybody was worried, and we could feel the war in the air. Jewish families had been chased out of Germany and poured into Poland. There was bitter news from all over. Next day, I sent a telegram to my parents to let them know that we were home. They called me. They were fine. It was good to hear their voices. If I had only known that this was the last time I would speak to them, I would have kept on talking forever. Why did God pick me to be the only survivor, the only witness to the massacre of my beautiful family? And I'll read some more from her book about the ghetto. In Warsaw, life was tense. We Jews did not know what to expect. Therefore, we lived in fear. Every day came new directives for Jews, forbidding us to use public transportation or to visit museums and public parks, each day isolating us more and more. Alarming news began to pour into Warsaw about the fate of Jews in neighboring towns, of cruel beatings and murdering of Jewish people. They were chased from their homes and without food or clothing poured into Warsaw shelters set up in schools, synagogue, and other Jewish buildings. There were so many sick and hungry. As a nurse, I visited as many as I could, running through courtyards and climbing over roofs to avoid the Poles and the Nazis. It was impossible to help everyone. Very often we got caught in a crossfire as the Nazis and Poles shot people at random. A Ukrainian soldier stopped to talk to an elderly lady. He seemed respectful. He smiled at her, and when she turned to leave, he shot her in cold blood. I ran to her, trying to help, but she died within minutes. The murderer stared at me. I was angry, bitter, and fearless. If I had a gun in my hands, I would have shot him, just the same way he did the elderly woman. As autumn of 1940 approached, the establishment of the ghetto in Warsaw was imminent, and we began to search for an apartment. In the ghetto, I went out only on emergencies, where they could not get hold of a nurse or a medic. It was very painful to see the hungry children sitting on the sidewalk with outstretched, bone-dry hands begging for a piece of bread. When I gave them some food, they were so weak they could hardly hold the bread in their hands. Famous musicians played in the street to earn some food. The winter of 1941 was harsh. Whole families wrapped in rags sat on the sidewalk, unable to move because their legs were frozen. I could not bear it. A year had passed. It was Passover again, April 1941. Stachio was now 11. I was still not born, obviously. Wizened and old beyond his years, we held our Seder in secrecy. The table was covered with a white tablecloth, and the room lit with only a few candles. We were 12 around the table as we recited the Haggadah. Stachio was again the youngest and asked the 4 questions. With bitter, heartfelt words, we all prayed for next year in Jerusalem. During the day, the men worked, and each evening we gathered in a different apartment. There was a desperate need to help in the soup kitchens and to visit the sick. Typhoid was inescapable. Each morning, the corpses lay in the street covered only with newspaper. In the former synagogues, schools, and libraries and stores that were made into dormitories for the Jews driven into Warsaw from the outlying areas, we saw the most horrible living conditions. My husband, like many others, started to build bunkers and other hideouts. We'll still believe that the war could not last much longer, and the Jews in the general government area, the central part of occupied Poland, would survive. So in October 1941, my mother found out that her parents and her siblings had all been killed in an outlying town outside of Warsaw. There were these groups called Einsatzgruppen. These were Nazi groups that would go around with the sole purpose of killing Jews. And she found out that they were killed. She became so depressed and was in shock, and she took pills to kill herself. The next morning, she was awakened. She was still alive. My father, who knew people in Warsaw, asked a psychologist, a friend of his, to come over, and he talked to them and said, Chava, that was her name, Chava, you need something to live for. You should get pregnant. I was conceived soon after that. I was born in 1942, weighing 2.2 pounds. I was 2 months premature. It was a terrible time to have a baby, obviously. The roundups by the Nazis had started, and since I was an infant, I would cry. I couldn't be taken to a hideout. So my mother, she was an amazing woman, very courageous. She would go downstairs and walk into the street where the Nazis were hurting people and carrying me in her arms. And, you know, she didn't look particularly Jewish. She looked somewhat Polish. She spoke Polish beautifully. She knew the Catholic customs, and she got away with it. They just ignored her. So that's how she survived the roundups. But I want to read you, okay, when I heard the SS screaming, "Runter," that's the German meaning for down, I rushed Stasio and the Mendelssohns up to the hiding place. Everyone else was at work. I could not hide with them because of baby Stefan. He might start to cry and betray our hiding place. I put him in my white down pillow. This is how we carried babies in Poland, and went downstairs. I felt that all eyes were staring at me. My baby was 6 weeks old by then, and he weighed about 4 pounds. Stefan looked like a newborn. The SS officer was very polite, looked at me, but didn't bother to check my working permit. I was free to go. So conditions were deteriorating very badly at that time. More and more people were found and caught and sent to the trains. My father was able to make arrangements to smuggle me and my mother out of the ghetto. And that occurred on March 1st, 1943. He and Stasio, my brother, would join us later. It was too dangerous to be together. Money was paid, and my mother and I were taken out of the ghetto. We were placed in a village in southern Poland. We had papers, false papers, posing as the wife of an officer. So I'm going to read you a little bit about that. So everything was fine until the middle of April, when I heard about the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. People came with news of the uprising from Warsaw, gloating that the Jews were burning. My heart cried bitterly. I could barely say hello to people in the street. I had to be cheerful, but how? I was almost positive that Victor and Stasio had left the ghetto, but maybe they hadn't. Victor was a hydraulic engineer, my father, and Stasio was eager to join the resistance. Maybe they stayed. My nights were sleepless, and in the morning my pillow was wet from tears. I wanted to fly to them to help them fight, but how could I? I had to take care of our baby. The worst was not knowing. To avoid listening to talk about the burning Jews in Warsaw, I would take the baby out for long walks. The trouble was that people were suspicious. They were always suspicious. Poles would be paid to find Jews and bring them to the Gestapo. And so there were suspicions about my mother, and the Gestapo was after us. And my mother realized that we really had to flee from where we were. And I'll read you about one episode with the Gestapo. Okay, this is just then the door swung open. This is in southern Poland, where we were in sort of like hiding. Just then the door swung open and a man strode into the room. I know who you are, he shouted at me harshly. You're going with me to the police. I don't know you, and I'm not going with you, I said firmly. He showed me his card. He was a plainclothes detective, so I had no choice but to go with him. The precinct was a few blocks away. We quietly walked to the precinct. As we entered the old building, I saw that the entrance hall was full of Polish police and Nazis. I felt all their eyes staring at us. The detective took us straight into the investigation room, where the Gestapo officer sat at a large desk. The detective announced, I brought you a Jewess. I was calm and very sure of myself. I felt no fear and had decided that no matter how hard they hit me, I would not confess. If I confessed, not only would we be killed, but other people might suffer. I made up my mind to take the pain and fight. I would not give in. I stood squarely in front of the Gestapo, looked them straight in the eyes. There was no fear in my face. I pretended that I didn't understand German. Therefore, the Polish detective served as my translator. Your identification card, the Gestapo barked at me. Here it is. I gave it to him. This does not say you are a Catholic. I am a Roman Catholic, I said firmly. You will tell us the truth by the time we finish with you. He stood glaring at me. The Polish detective turned to me. Give the baby to me while they interrogate you. I am not giving the baby to you, I protested. The SS officer slapped me so hard that my teeth loosened. Blood began pouring from my mouth. I did not feel pain. From a corner of one of the SS officers came forward. One of the SS officers came forward, gently took the baby from my hands, and gave me a paper to wipe the blood off my face. I suspected he might be a father of a small child. He was polite. I overheard them talking to the Polish detective. She does not look Jewish, they said. Such a very nice lady. Ask her if she has someone who would come and certify that she's really Catholic. The Pole again turned to me. Do you have some friends who would be willing to come and certify that you're not Jewish? Of course, I exclaimed. I have many friends who would be willing to come here all the way from Warsaw. The SS officer gave my son back to me and showed me the way to the bathroom. While I washed, they decided my fate. I came out. The blood was gone from my face, but the swelling remained. Again, they started. Is your son baptized? I shook my head. Why not? I'm waiting for the war to end, I answered quietly, so the whole family will be able to come. Do you have other papers besides the ID card? I have papers verifying that I graduated St. Sophie's School of Nursing. My diploma was destroyed during the bombing of Warsaw. I had trouble getting a job without a diploma. Two of my schoolmates witnessed that I graduated St. Sophia School of Nursing together with them in 1936. The Gestapo looked at the papers and looked at me. Where are your friends now? They live in Warsaw. Are you going back to Warsaw? Yes, I am. I replied, I will have to look for a job. Finally, the investigation was over and they let me go. So, subsequently, my mother and I, mother carrying me, decided to go back to Warsaw. She got on a train, crowded with people. She was robbed while she was on the train. She got to Warsaw, no papers. She had no ID whatsoever. She had some jewelry hidden in her body. She said she didn't know what to do. She actually tried to go back to the ghetto, but the uprising was taking place and she couldn't get in. Now, she had a very good friend, a Polish friend that she knew, and Kazimiera Lisicka. And Kazimiera told her, if you ever have trouble in Warsaw, my brother is a policeman and he could help you. So she decided to look for this man. His name was Matacz, last name. And she went carrying me, the infant, and I was like 10 months old. She went from precinct to precinct looking for him and finally found him. And his name was Stefan Matacz. And he arranged to hide us, to take care of us. It's a whole long story, but from that moment on, we were protected by the Matacz family. It was we went from one family member to another family member because of suspicions. We finally ended up in a town called Banyoka, which is where my mother managed to stay for the last year and a half. And she actually, she dyed her hair blonde. She spoke Polish beautifully. She knew the Catholic customs. I was not circumcised. So it was very easy to imagine that she could pass as a Polish woman. And she did. She actually worked as a nurse at a German field hospital. I have memories of that time. I was like 2.5 years old, 3 years old at the most. I remember boys chasing me and asking me to pull down my pants to see if I was circumcised. I remember walking into a barn-like building, and there were just dead bodies lying on the floor with their eyes open. But anyway, we survived that. And at the end of the war, the Russians liberated that part of Poland. And, things got better, not much better, because the Jewish people, as they were liberated, they tried to go back to where they had originally had possessions, homes. They went to their original towns. The Poles didn't like that, and they were chased away. Sometimes they were killed because all their property had been taken over. So it was a difficult time, and a lot of Jews managed to connect with an agency that would help them in some way, which is what my mother did. And what I'd like to do is read you the last chapter of her book at this point. Okay, so this is after the war. My mother, I'll go into it a little more as I show you the slides of what happened right at that point, but this is when my mother went back to Poland. And I'm going to read you this. For many years, I had wanted to return home to Mush, but I never could. 50 years later, in 1989, I went home. I knew that no one was alive, but I never really had faced that reality. I thought I'd be really coming home, that someone would be there to greet me. Reality came as a shock. On our property, people had built homes using the wood and materials of other buildings. There was a cemetery in Mush where my grandparents and great uncles were buried. I went there to where it used to be, and there was no cemetery. It was now a park. There were no graves, not even a sign of a grave. My little river with my ducks and geese was now a big road. All that was left of my childhood home was our old well, still being used to supply the neighbors with water. When I first arrived in town, I went to the marketplace. It was a Sunday, and people stood outside. The churches still stood, as did the 2 synagogues, although they're not being used as such. We drove along further and got out of the car to ask a Russian family, where could I meet people who lived here before the war? They sent me farther along the road towards the Central Market. A group of elderly people stood in front of a grocery store. I got out of the car to address the group. I am Shaya's daughter. One of the men walked over to me, peering into my face. And you must be Chava, he said incredulously. He recognized me. When I asked him what happened to my family, he answered with a big smile on his face. Oh, they were somewhere buried in the woods with all the others. This man used to live on a hill. We played together as children, sledding down the hill in the snow. Now he had built a house on our property. A lady standing nearby overheard us and approached my driver. She had been a classmate of my youngest brother and was obviously moved by my visit. It was late in the evening. She told us to come back the next morning. She would show us the place where my father and 3 brothers were buried, my mother's father. The next morning, she had prepared tea for us and had each invited 2 Jewish women from Baranovich to accompany us. We began walking through the woods, through dense, overgrown brush, until we finally came to a clearing. There, stretched out before me, was a wide ditch the size of a small field. Part was covered with grass, but mostly there was bare dirt, with what appeared to be dried branches scattered about. As I walked closer, the horror sank in. These were not branches. These were human bones. This was probably one of the many unrecognized mass graves strewn about the hillsides of Eastern Europe. I stood staring at that ditch and felt wooden. I had no more tears. I left Poland, stopping off in Israel on my way home. Only in Israel and my husband's and son's graves could my heart again spill the tears for all those we lost. This is her, not Victor, it was her husband after she remarried and her son from that marriage. I'll explain that later. Upon returning to America, I arranged to have those bones properly buried and the ditch properly covered. You know, the Russians entered Warsaw in January of 1945. My father and Stasia were in the ghetto during the uprising. And we found out later from somebody who knew that what happened, they were captured and they were sent to Auschwitz, and that's where they were killed. And so what happened was, and I'm going to show you slides that will explain better what happened after the end of the war. So this is a slide. Am I blocking it? I am.
Go to that side.
Yeah. Can I move this? Yeah. This is my mother's family. And you can see there are a lot of their siblings, and one or two of the siblings are married, so they have their spouses with them, and one of them has a child. They had like I said, it was a wonderful family. Very happy. This is my father's family, Victor. Victor is the man standing next to the woman with wife. There were 4 children. And of my father's family, there were survivors. The man on the left standing came to the US in the 20s. He obtained a PhD in chemistry, came to this country, started a chemical business, and he became sort of my idol because when I came to the States, he was my father's brother. So I really connected with him, and that's probably why I started out in chemistry. That's my mother and me in 1943.
Oh, cute.
Okay, so this is the Matacz family that protected us. I'm the little guy there. My mother is holding me. And the young woman next to me was actually my babysitter. She actually watched me throughout the day. And, she was very nice, and I got to meet her subsequently when I went back to Poland. So this was when my mother worked at the field hospital. And towards the end, she worked in the field hospital. She was friendly with one of the doctors there, and she thought maybe he had some sort of Jewish connection because he really took a liking to me, and maybe suspected that there was something unusual. But I'm wearing his military cap there, and that's the Matacz girl who was my babysitter, and I'm sitting on a horse. That's my mother and I in 1945. This is after liberation. So after liberation, my mother managed to go to an agency. Agencies were involved in, getting Jewish people to where they want to go, Israel or wherever. They did their best to get people to survive and move on. And what happened to us, we ended up in France for about a year, awaiting whatever was going to happen. They put us up in some sort of it looked like a mansion to me. That's me on the right with my mother in France. I actually learned how to speak French at that point. My mother married my stepfather, David, after the war. They got married in France. He was also a survivor. Obviously, he was in a camp, a work camp, so he wasn't killed, but he was tortured and everything else. But they got married. They went on a honeymoon to Switzerland, taking me along with them. That's me. Okay, so what happened? So we came to this country in 1947, and the reason we were able to come to this country was because David's brother had come to this country before the war. He was a Rabbi Simcha Wasserman, and he sponsored us. And we managed to come to this country. My mother, of course, wanted to have another family, and she immediately had two more children, my sister and my brother, my sister Minna and my brother Alan. I'm the oldest one on the left-hand side here. Okay, so we went back to Poland. It was the first time, obviously the second time for me after having been born there, in 1989. And that is Stefan Matacz, sitting in the middle, the policeman, and his wife, Marisha, and my mother's on the right there. And it was an amazing experience. Such kind people, they were still kind. And I remember my mother obviously felt very attached to them. She didn't talk about them very much while I was growing up, but she always would pack a carton full of clothes and other things to send to the Matacz family in Poland every year. And I went back, that's my daughter. Okay, this is the same trip. The woman on the right there is my babysitter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's my daughter in the middle, my mother in the very middle, and Wojtek, who's somebody I connected with when I was living in Poland towards the end. He was my friend. So we connected with each other. That was a very memorable trip because my mother, obviously wanted me to connect with what happened. And we arrived in Warsaw, and she would have to translate everything to me because they didn't speak English, not at all. And I couldn't understand the Polish. I could understand my mother speaking Polish, but not anybody else. So she would start translating. The first 2 days she would translate. Then she forgot how to speak English.
Oh.
Yeah. So after 2 days, it was like, what were they saying? Okay, so I want to show this. That's my mother with Stefan Matacz. My mother managed to go back to Baranovich, to Mush, actually, where her family had been killed. And I want to show you that. So that's her visit.
Well, we never made it to Baranovich during our trip to Warsaw, except my mother finally did get to go there. She managed to get a visa from the Russian authorities and did go to Baranovich, which is, of course, where she was born and where her family grew up. She wanted to see what happened to her property and whether anybody knew what actually happened to her family. And these photographs are of her trip to Baranovich in May of 1989. When she arrived there, the initial reaction from the residents was one, disbelief, because some of them actually recognized her, and the others because she came back to retrieve property. But after she reassured them, they actually were cooperative and told her what happened. to the Jews of Ronovich, including her family. And they were taken to the woods and shot by the Germans. And the site is actually shown in this photograph. And when my mother was there, she looked and she unbelievably saw bones in the earth, which could have been the bones of her parents for all she knew. Anyway, it was a very, very moving trip for her.
So, we went, Barbara, and my son, Jacob, who's now, he was born, he's now 34 years old. We decided to take him back to Warsaw. We did a trip to Poland and then to Israel. And what we did in Poland, and this is, I'm not going to show this because it's too long, but we had a chakra service at Auschwitz, and this is the chakra service at Auschwitz on a Shabbos morning. And then we went to to Birkenau, where the extermination camp was. We went to the site where the ovens were, which is still visible. They're not completely destroyed. The Germans tried to destroy them, but they're still there. We took rocks from there, and then we flew to Israel. We took a El Al plane from Warsaw to Tel Aviv. If only they could have done that 80 years ago. But and we took the stones to where my mother's buried. She's buried in a cemetery in Beit Shemesh. She always wanted to go back to Israel. She was such a devotee of Israel and Jewish people. So my mother's buried there. My stepbrother's buried there, and my stepfather is buried there. So it's very symbolic, and we felt so good doing that. My mother obviously had a very nice family. This is my sister with her kids. She had 5 kids. So my mother accomplished what she wanted to accomplish. She wanted to create a family, the family that was denied her by Hitler at first. Then this is the other side of the family, which is also growing. So it's so nice to have a large family like this. And what we ended up doing was I applied to the Yad Vashem to get the Matacz family designated as righteous Gentiles. And that was successful. Eventually, they investigate. After a year, they said, yes, they deserve that designation. So we all went to Warsaw, where the Israeli ambassador gave them the designation, the plaque, that they are righteous Gentiles. So this is my family and the Matacz family, and the Israeli ambassador at the Nozick synagogue, which is the only structure that remained in the Warsaw Ghetto that wasn't destroyed by the Germans, mainly because they were using the synagogue as their horse stable.
Yeah.
But the synagogue was recreated, and now is an active synagogue, and we went there to have the ceremony. And just by chance, that's where my father, Victor, and my mother were married, in that synagogue. And that's giving the plaque to a member of the family. And so I want to just conclude with this. So the reason I conclude with this is my mother, in some ways I'm happy she's not alive to see what's going on now. But she would be so happy watching this video that I'm going to show you. So what I can say is that if Israel existed 80 years ago, probably the Holocaust would have happened. So we just have to keep strong.
Thank you so much, Dr. Felton, for the moving readings and sharing.
You're very welcome.
We'll have a chance to hear some questions. Either you can repeat the questions for folks on Zoom, or if you'd like me to come up, I can do it, whatever you prefer.
I can do that.
Okay, so after your question, if you just repeat a shorter version on Zoom, and I'm also getting texts if anybody has questions on Zoom, so I'll be able to ask for them.
Okay.
So friends, anything is open. Why don't we start with anyone under 18 to see if any of them want to ask any first question, any type of question at all is fine. Okay, all right, we'll come back to you all if any of you have questions. Let's go to folks over 18. Okay, Andy.
Stephen, that was just incredibly moving. My husband's family came from Sokolov Podlaski, about 50 miles east of Warsaw, which we visited. And the cemetery there is a park. And we walked around it about 4 extra blocks to get to our lunch spot because it was probably the graves of his grandparents. My question is about the importance of Auschwitz. Auschwitz is near Krakow. And it's my understanding that most of the Jews in Warsaw went to Treblinka, which is where my husband's family was exterminated. He had only his mother and his father, no aunts, no uncles, no cousins. And I wondered why Auschwitz played into your history when Treblinka was just a stone's throw from Warsaw.
Yeah, well,
Sorry, if you don't mind repeating the question.
oh, yeah, the question was that, whether Treblinka was the main camp that Warsaw residents, Warsaw Jews were sent to, as opposed to Auschwitz. It's my understanding that they were both. Treblinka was obviously the most,
Yeah.
but a lot was sent to Auschwitz. And I know for a fact from the person who reported it that my father and brother were sent to Auschwitz, where they were killed.
Well, you said they were in the resistance.
They were in the resistance. They were
not
captured.
in Warsaw, and they were captured elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story. My father tried to get visas for the whole 5 of us. Actually, it was 4 of us. And he had to pay a lot of money to do that. And there was somebody at the Hotel Polski, that's what I was told, which was in Warsaw, where you would go and pay money and you get the visas. And he actually did that. It turns out the visas didn't work. And so after, I'm not sure exactly what the sequence was, but I know from Warsaw, they were put on a train to Hanover in Germany and then taken back to Auschwitz. And I'm not sure exactly why that happened. What I suppose happened was they thought the visas were going to work, so they were taken to Hanover, where they found out they're not working. They were sent back, and it's not clear. The communications weren't that good, but Auschwitz is famous because it has the Arbeit makes you free. That
And
sign.
it's still there.
It's still there. It's still there. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you know whether your father and your brother survived at all, or they were killed as soon as they got there?
I don't know that. I assume they were killed as soon as they got there. Yeah, sure.
So, why should people know these stories? And why should young people learn about the Holocaust? It might be enough to say, okay, there were terrible people who were the Nazis and they did horrible things, and then, okay, that's enough. Why should we teach the stories and the particulars of all this?
Well, I ask that question all the time. We walk around saying things like, we learn from history. Well, do we really learn from history? That's the question. And maybe we don't learn from history because we don't really discuss things that happened in the past that are sort of not pleasant discussions. And so I believe that if we need to get down and dirty and talk about what really happened, and maybe that would give us incentive to learn from history. Looking at what's happening today, you feel like, we're just repeating everything again. But the human race, it's a big question mark as to where we're heading. And I have, all kinds of thoughts about that. And now we have artificial intelligence, and people are saying that maybe these robots are going to be smarter than us. In which case, maybe there won't be a Holocaust in the future because it doesn't make any sense. It's not intelligent to have a Holocaust. It doesn't accomplish anything. I mean, what did it accomplish? I mean, it's based on Holocaust is based on crazy ideas, based on maniacs. It's based on mob theory. You get one crazy person who has charisma and everybody follows him. They don't really think about it too much. They just follow that person who's crazy and has charisma, which is what Hitler had. Yeah. So that's my interpretation. Yes.
I'd like to know what date you were born in June of 42.
The question was, what date was I born? I was born June 14, 1942.
That was
4
my
days
mother's,
older than me.
4 days old?
and that was my mother's birthday, although she was a little older.
Oh, well, yeah, I feel proud to have June 14 because Paul McCartney was born June 14, 1943. He's exactly the same age. So, yes.
In light of your last comment, I am a child of survival also. My mom passed 4 years ago. She was quiet about what happened and she didn't discuss it all that much, but she was always cognizant of this isn't over.
Mhm.
Did you get the same thing from your mom?
My mom was, she was unbelievable. I think she believed so strongly in Israel and the Jewish people and the fact that the Jewish people will survive any crisis whatsoever, that when she died, it was really interesting. She had colon cancer. She had malignant colon cancer. And she was in a hospice at my sister's home in Boston. And, the day that everybody thought she was dying, we were up there. I quickly drove up from Princeton, New Jersey to be there. And she was in a comatose state. But when I got there, she actually opened her eyes and she smiled at everybody, a real smile, and then she died. It's like she saw that her family was all together, so therefore it was okay for her to die. She came to this country in 47. We came on a ship. I forget the name of the ship. It was the winter of 1947, and it was a terrible snowstorm. So we had to dock at Gravesend Bay, right near the Statue of Liberty. And people were standing on the deck, looking at the Statue of Liberty, and looking at the lights on the highway, the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn. And from what I was told and what I think I saw, there was tremendous emotion because they came from such despair to such a country with such promise of freedom, and which was actually what she attained. She came to this country. She didn't speak any English. Neither did my stepfather. Within a year, they both spoke English. He went to Cooper Union to get a degree in engineering at night. He taught Hebrew during the day. My mother sewed yarmulkes during the day. That's how they made a living. They had no money. We lived in a little apartment behind a Venetian blind store on Church Avenue in Brooklyn. And somehow it's in Crown Heights.
No,
Crown
what was
Heights.
across street?
I forget. There's Kings Highway was nearby. Kings Highway? Maybe it was a different highway.
I don't know, they
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, that was separate.
Church.
I know Bensonhurst. I forgot about. But anyway, so there was a tremendous success there. My mother managed to do great things. She worked as a nurse in a doctor's office. She was very kind to people. She took care of people who were destitute and who needed help. She had a very positive outlook. She was courageous, but she survived tragedy, and she continued to survive tragedy. My brother, my stepbrother, who was 32 at the time, developed cancer and died, and she heard about that. All of a sudden, it was a shock to her. And she survived that, and she continued to believe in the state of Israel and the Jewish people. And that's how, and when she died, she had my sister with her whole family and me with my family, so she was happy. Yeah. Yes, sir.
And you were saved by a Polish family. What did she think about the Polish people? Were most of them pretty much anti-Semitic, or did you find there was a balance, or what was your feeling about that?
I never asked her that question, but I'll tell you what I thought from my observation. I think most Poles were probably anti-Semitic. But there were some that weren't, including this Matacz family. And I spoke to right now it's the people who saved us are not around anymore, but I still have contact with the grandkids, one grandkid in particular. And this guy, his name is Michal Matacz. He just got married. We talked about this. He's very nice, very pleasant, understands what happened, but doesn't have any explanation as to why they did it. Because they put their lives in danger. I mean, not only their lives, the whole family's lives. He doesn't have any explanation. They were good people. And it turns out most people are good people, in my opinion. It's the few bad ones that make the impact. But speaking to Michal, we started talking about, at one point, we talked about Israel. And that's when we sort of diverged a bit because he wasn't very pro-Israel. But that's the way, a lot of people, they get opinions and there is a revival of Jewish people, not only in Poland, but in Germany. Jewish people are doing better in Germany than they're doing elsewhere, which is kind of unusual. Yes.
When you were raised, did your mother and family embrace Jewish culture? Or were they a little bit cautious of doing so?
So the question was, when I was raised, did my family embrace Jewish culture, or were they somewhat cautious in doing so? Well, my stepfather came from a very religious family. His father was Rebbe Elchanan Wasserman, a very famous rabbi in Baranovich. So he was pretty much attached to traditional Jewish culture. My mother, somewhat less so. And I went to yeshivas. I went to yeshiva Flatbush High School and O.L. Moshe. But I identified with my uncle, my father's brother, more than I did with my stepfather. And, I'm very, very Jewish, very attached to the Jewish culture, but I'm not particularly observant, although I go to Chabad. We live down in Florida, so I'm very attached to the Chabad down in Florida. I like the rabbi a whole lot. So I love that. I love that. But I don't follow the laws like a lot of people do. And I grew up with that, with my mother allowing me to be that way. I wasn't condemned in any fashion. She let me do what I felt like I wanted to do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, such an interesting
Thanks,
talk. Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us wherever you are today or tonight. And we do have a book available. If you're here on Zoom, you can look on Amazon, of course. I Shall Lead You Through the Nights is a book to check out. And thank you all so much for joining us, and to Barb and Dr. Felton, thank you for being here. Have a wonderful night.